First of all, I'd like to thank Cromwell for allowing me to visit and talk a little bit about the topic I'm going to discuss. A little bit about myself. I'm a native of Arkansas. Grew up in Northwest Arkansas, went to school up there. Joined the Navy back in 1988. Had an outstanding naval career as a submarine officer and nuclear engineer. So I do like my power engineering. I'll just start right there. I like my power engineering. I got out, was a consultant for about a year, and then I said, I don't like this. And I went back into government. Spent 20 years as an FBI special agent. Came back to Arkansas in 2010. And my joke was that it took me 23 years and 4 wars to make it home, which there's a lot of accuracy there. So I came back home at the end of 2010. I was an executive here for my last 5 years in the FBI. I was the #2 guy. It's called Assistant Special Agent in Charge. I didn't know any of you folks back then. We moved to Benton, and then after 12 years in Benton, and well, actually 5 years in the Bureau, then I went back out to DC to be an executive with the Department of Education Office of Inspector General. I was in charge of all their technology crimes nationwide. So things like fraud and people hacking into databases. It doesn't sound very sexy until you consider the fact that Department of Education has a couple of data sets. One is called the National Student Loan Database, which has information on 180 million Americans, parents and students. That'd be nice if you were rushing in to grab that. If you look at the, actually that's FAFSA, that's a FAFSA database. The National Student Loan Database has information that all those accounts together would be the 4th largest bank in the world. If you look at all those student loans that are captured in the National Student Loan Database. So my job was to protect that from bad people. We'll talk a little bit about those bad people here. So that's what I did. Retired from federal government in 2015. And then I spent the last 7 years as a consultant, but I've also worked for some companies like Southwest Power Pool. I was their director of security and compliance. And then I was up in Fayetteville area at Washington Regional Medical System. While I was at Washington Regional Medical System, I got involved in some quality work. And that's how I met Jeff at the Governor's Quality Award. So I'm a state examiner for the Arkansas Governor's Quality Award. 2 years ago, I was actually national examiner for the Department of Commerce, NIST, who manages the Ballard's Performance Framework. So enough about me. I'm so excited to be here because I love Cromwell. When I was a younger engineer and I was looking around what I was going to do after I finished the Navy, Cromwell was one of the handful of places that came up on my target list. Cromwell, and there's a little place called Burns and McDonnell up in Kansas City I looked at. I'm still on the Burns and McDonnell email list. I get their newsletters. I try to track infrastructure pretty carefully. And you'll figure out why here in a minute. So my goal in doing this presentation is to have a conversation where we help Cromwell help your customers stay safe from cyber threats. Now I focus on ransomware. Why do I focus on ransomware? That's what's really killing people right now. If you're looking at hospitals, I did a presentation 4 months ago for the National Healthcare and Pharma Cybersecurity Summit. And I talked about a ransomware group out of Russia that is focused exclusively on healthcare. Like 90% of healthcare institutions have been hit by them in one way or another. So we'll talk a little bit about why I focus on ransomware. Well, let's go ahead and get going. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, why this should matter to you. I want you to get something of value out of this other than the Mo's. All right. Now, I think Mo's is a good reason for you to come visit. Next time I do this, all of you are going to tell your office mates, yeah, we had Mo's. And then they're going to go, man, I should have showed up. So this is the first time in the barrel. We'll be back. Okay. And we'll actually talk about even some cooler stuff, hopefully, if Jeff lets me back. But why should this matter to you? I want this to bring value to you as Cromwell engineers. Second is, what is ransomware? I'm going to explain what it is. I'm going to talk about a little bit of what's happened in this crazy thing called ransomware. Third thing we're going to do is, how should a company defend against ransomware? because I'm going to dispel 2 ransomware myths, okay? And those myths apply to cybersecurity across the board. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about how you can recover from ransomware, and then I'm going to give you some takeaways. So you have something, a couple of things you can remember other than how good Mose is. So let's talk about industrial controls. So industrial controls in the United States face threats. So let me just kind of set the table here. How many of you are working on contracts for the United States Department of Defense? Anybody? Well, now, are those contracts have to do with physical facilities, I'm presuming, right? Because I'm at Cromwell Architects and Engineers. Do those physical facilities have HVAC systems? Yeah, electrical power distribution control systems. Do its Department of Defense, do any of them have what are called physical access controls? Locks, cameras. Are any of those things networked? Are they connected to a network? Well, then I'm talking to the right audience, because guess what? That network can become what I call a nexus of attack for all of those critical systems. So, how many of you are working on bids or quotes, proposals, I'll use the official term. How many of you are working on proposals where cyber resiliency has become part of the proposal criteria? Man, I'm talking to the right audience. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing me here. I appreciate this. So, enterprise cybersecurity. Anybody here in IT here? Yes. Oh, man. What's your name? Randy. Randy. So Randy is over here on the left. Enterprise cybersecurity. He is responsible for enterprise IT. Okay. Control layer cybersecurity is all the other stuff I was just talking about. Because there's a big term called industrial control systems, and industrial control systems can include a boatload of things, okay? It can include HVAC, it can include electrical power distribution systems. In the manufacturing and distribution environment I was at with AmerisourceBergen, guess what? It's manufacturing controls for processes such as conveyor belts and picking devices, okay? We call those industrial controls or manufacturing controls. But all of those things, both enterprise cybersecurity, Randy there in the back. Hey, Randy, did you get food?
I'll get some later.
Okay. I hate it when the IT guys don't get treated as well as everybody else. Randy, get yourself some food. Right? That treated me pretty well. But enterprise cybersecurity is not the same as control layer security, okay? We all agree on that, right? Because some of the things that work for Randy's stuff doesn't work for your stuff, okay? So let's talk about the types of threats. I'm going to go into the extortion and persistent threat. There's a term we used in the intelligence community called the advanced persistent threat, because the Chinese are advanced and they're persistent and they are a threat. So we call it the APT. Well, I call it the extortion and persistent threat for those nice folks from Russia who are, you know, tangentially connected maybe to Russian intelligence, but they're trying to steal money from American institutions through ransomware. There's various other types of attacks that industrial controls can face. So let's talk about some of the sectors where these controls can face. Now, anybody know what that list is? Somebody want to guess what that list is? All right. Isn't that pretty clever of me? I asked you a question so I can take a drink of water. But these are what are called critical infrastructures. So every one of these sectors you see up here, we can think of them as industry verticals. Every one of these sectors are critical infrastructures. Now, anybody know why the ones are bolded and are in that beautiful color of ExtraHop green? What are those? Those are critical structures that use a lot of industrial controls. Okay? Why is healthcare and public health sector in red? Because they use a lot of industrial controls. We call it medical technology there. Okay, now the facilities. Anybody here working on a DoD hospital? I should just tell people. Those have a lot of industrial controls. We're going to call them physical controls for the buildings, physical building management systems, okay? But they also have medical technology on top of that, which is kind of its own special branch of industrial controls. It's a type of OT, operational technology. You'll hear me use the term operational technology synonymous with industrial controls now. So operational technology is making things work. Enterprise IT, information technology, is managing the data. And there's an overlap if you think about this using a Venn diagram. So let's talk about ransomware. So there's a cyber confidence survey that was done in 2022. This is from a presentation I did at a cybersecurity conference called RSAC, a big one out in San Francisco. 85% of respondents on this survey experienced ransomware in one form or another. Okay. Now, I actually I did a little post on LinkedIn where I went over an article. The article was very synonymous with what I covered in the presentation. And I have a little computer icon on LinkedIn right here. 72% paid the ransom. Okay. So a little icon under there on my LinkedIn account is a bag of money. You know, that little emoji, bags of money. That 60% were hit more than once. So think about it. 85% get hit, 72% pay, and the best part is 60% get hit again. Why do they get hit again? Because they did not do proper recovery. They did not eradicate the bad guys from their environment. And so they just come right back to the money well. That's exactly what they do. They come back to the well because they know that they weren't cleaned out, and because they weren't cleaned out. And this is why I want to make sure that not just Randy's enterprise IT systems are protected, but we want to protect the operational OT systems, okay? Now, anybody, I'm going to have a picture of it at the end, but anybody remember a time in the last 6 months, 9 months, when a company that had a wide range of operational technology systems got attacked, they got shut down for 30 plus days, and it impacted the, let's say, the gas supply on the entire East Coast. Anybody remember that? Who is that?
Colonial.
Colonial, there we go. All right, Colonial Pipeline. It's interesting. I was at Princeton last Tuesday. Tried to make it home. I was going to fly into Princeton, Newark, fly back. I was going to leave at 5 in the morning from Little Rock, get back at like 1:30 through Atlanta a.m. Didn't make it. Got stuck in Atlanta overnight. That's my problem, not yours. I understand. I'm just whining. But you know what? While I was at Princeton, I was driving up and down I-95. And I saw these, you know, near Newark, these big petroleum tank farms, and one of them said Colonial. And I thought to myself, yep, that's exactly what happened. Something about that Colonial attack. Does anybody know if the OT systems, operational technology systems, were ever touched? They were not. The Russians did not make it that far. They only made it into Randy's systems, the enterprise IT. Sorry, Randy, I'm not going to pick on you. They only made it into the enterprise IT systems, but guess what? Because they made it into the enterprise IT systems, what did they have to do? They had to shut it all down. So that can be the impact to your OT, operational technology systems, when it gets hacked. Now let's talk about modern ransomware. Anybody remember the good old days, 2014? Where were you in 2014, Randy?
Just graduated high school.
Just graduated from high school. So do you remember ransomware back then?
I remember hearing about it on the news and stuff.
Yeah, so ransomware was like, you would click on something stupid in an email and it would infect your endpoint, your machine, right? That was one endpoint, and the average ransom paid was $1,100. I'm sorry, your endpoint, your computer, your laptop, your workstation has been encrypted. You need to pay me $1,100 and we'll send you the decryption key. And about 30% of the time, the decryption key actually works. 2018, I'm at Washington Regional Medical System. We and several other people get hit by WannaCry, not Petya. Anybody remember that? Well, Randy does. We didn't get hit. Why? Because while we had SMBV1 enabled, which allowed it to propagate, it couldn't get out because we used a thing called OpenDNS. Now it's Cisco umbrella, and it kept the ransomware from beaconing out. So guess what? Our systems at the hospital were not corrupted. They were not encrypted. But that's not what's going on now. It's not something that self-propagates. Now what happens is the people actually get into your network in the same way APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, gets into our Defense Department networks, and they work their way through the entire network. We call it horizontal or east-west movement till they find exactly what they want. Your database, I mean, what would happen if you guys use AutoCAD? What would happen if all your AutoCAD files got encrypted tomorrow?
We'd get the day off.
Cha-ching! Woo! I'm sorry. Nobody here is in management, right? Okay. No. So, but that's the kind of thing. So I want you to look at the change right there at the next to bottom line of damages. Well, now the damages are about 1/6 of $1 million, right? 170 grand. That's why they're doing it. They're going after the money. So let's talk about the conventional wisdom. So we have certain myths, and one is you have to prevent them from getting in. Do you guys have phishing training, Randy? Keep people from clicking on stuff?
We have a system that usually flags that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you have email filtering. So you have email filtering to keep stuff from getting in that way, right? Now, one of the things, and I should add that to this presentation, is a research came out earlier this year looking at how ransomware is now being propagated. Phishing is going down and intrusions is going up. And you have some cross-site scripting, you have some attacks on database servers, SQL attacks, you have attacks on web servers. But the fact is the myth number one, the only way to stop ransomware is from getting them in. That's very perimeter oriented. So perimeter is the firewalls around your corporate network. Or you have controls on your endpoints because guess what? There's mobility. People now take their laptops home, right? Does everybody get to take your laptop home? Is your laptop when it's home in a secure environment? Do you have a firewall at home that keeps stuff from getting into your laptop? No, so you're vulnerable to something like cross-site scripting, even though maybe your email is more protected by some sort of sandbox, okay? So 93% of pen tests land inside the defender's network without using social engineering tactics. And 4.8, still after years and years and years of phishing training, 4.8% of links, phishing links and emails are still clicked on. So you may have 19 people who are perfect and Randy's system's operating perfect, but you still have Joe in accounting who can't stop from clicking on the ESPN. Do you have a Joe in accounting? I'm sorry. Randy knows exactly who I'm talking about, you know? They still click on it. So, so you still have a 5% chance of getting hit every single time somebody sends out an attack. We call them a phishing campaign. 93% of the time, you can still get in a network. So you can't stop them at the perimeter. So the other, we call these controls. Okay, so controls are perimeters, and they're controls at the back end, such as backup. You back everything up so that you can recreate it when it gets encrypted. Or you have my favorite, which is insurance, breach insurance. Well, what's funny is breach insurance just went up 400% this last year. From 2021 to 2022, the cost of the average breach insurance policy has gone up 400%. Why is that? Because people are still getting in. Now, I want you to think of a continuum, and I'm not going to bore you with some of the stuff I talk about in other presentations, but there's a couple things I'm going to say. One is called the Lockheed Martin kill chain, okay? Lockheed Martin kill chain has 8 steps. And if you can stop the intruder at one of those 8 steps, you stop the attack, okay? And it starts with initial intrusion, and then there's things such, we call it privilege escalation, where instead of having, what's your name, ma'am?
Pam.
Pam, instead of having Pam's privileges, you get Randy's privileges. And so Pam only has access to the project she's working on and her private documents. Well, Randy, what do you have access to, Randy?
Well, we don't really have things sectored off like that, I don't think.
So you don't
have access to everything.
So you pretty much have pretty unlimited privileges, right? Now, can Pam change your environment?
The only thing that is like private for each employee is we all have our own like private folder where stuff that can be shared with the office.
Okay, so there are still some privacy controls where people have those, but can you as a systems administrator get into those private folders?
Not me, no.
Not you, okay, but there's somebody in your environment who can, right? Okay, so those are called privileges. So some people are general users, some people, we call them power users. They have some privileges to enable some things in their environment. And then you have local administrators who are administrators on local devices, okay? Like you're only a database administrator or you're only a web server administrator. And then the top level is called domain administrators, and they're the ones who can control everything. Usually there's maybe 1 or 2 of those in an entire organization. So, but the fact is recovery is expensive and imperfect. Why? Because you may not be able to recover everything. And the bad part is you still have legal fees. You still have data loss because you don't recover everything. You still have downtime. Pam said, we get a day off. Woo-hoo! We call that downtime. You have lost business because the school district that was hoping that you were going to build them a building goes, nope, not today. And then you have reputation. Now, Cromwell has a very, very good reputation. We don't want to see that hurt. But more importantly, your customers, like the United States Department of Defense, and some of your big corporate manufacturing customers, they have reputations that need to be protected. Because I'm not here to sell it to Randy. You know, I'm here to say we can work together to help you protect your customers better. So what does it take to stop ransomware? And what does it look like for the modern enterprise? Anybody here? Well, let's talk a little bit about industrial controls. So over here on the far right, you have industrial process, okay? And that can be a pump at a chemical plant. And that can be a conveyor belt at a distribution center, an Amazon or Walmart distribution center. It's some sort of industrial process, okay? Now over there, controlling that industrial process is an ICS or a PLC. So you have an industrial control system of some kind, PLC. My favorite programmable logic controllers, I remember those from working in the Cadillac plant back in '95. PCS, distributed control systems. A lot of what you're putting into your building management systems are distributed control systems and PID. These are the really complicated ones. What it is? Who wants to tell me what PID is?
Control.
So yeah, it's
proportional integral derivative.
Bingo, because that's how you can control nonlinear systems. Proportional, integral, and differential. So those are connected via an industrial Ethernet segment to HMI, or human machine interface. That's how you're going to program them. You can have a SCADA system. So the SCADA system is what manages data acquisition. So we have in industrial systems, petroleum, chemical engineering or chemical processing. You have SCADA, that's supervisory control and data acquisition system. So you have your SCADA system, which aggregates data. That data can then be sent to a historian. Now, on the back side of the historian and the HMI, you have the enterprise network, okay? This is Randy's network. And you have the enterprise IT assets in that enterprise network, and then the enterprise network connects to the internet in some way. Now, if you have a really, really bad design, bubble on the right and bubble on the left are the very same bubble. Okay? If you have a better design, bubble on the right is segmented from bubble on the left. Okay? The best design is to have bubble on the right segmented from bubble on the left, and the historian and the human machine interface are configured to not act as routers. Okay? So people can't hack into the enterprise IT, get into the human machine interface, and then get into your industrial controls. Okay? Maybe they can see what your data is in your historian. Maybe that could give them some intellectual property, something of value to understand your processes. If you're a chemical manufacturing company or you have proprietary plastic, recipes. But at least you can keep them from messing with your programmable logic controllers and your industrial controls over on the far right. So now we've talked about your environment. Well, let me ask you a quick question. Your contracts for your defense hospitals that you're building in Europe, how many of those require segmentation of their building control systems from your the business Ethernet, DoD net? No. Okay. So since you can't protect these systems with segmentation, you have to protect them by monitoring and detection. Okay? So on the right, on the left, you have the initial intrusions. Okay? They can get in through phishing. They can get in through what's called a CVE. That's a vulnerability. Okay? CVE vulnerabilities are rated from 1 to 5, 1 being informational, 5 being it's a published exploit, and tools are out there that can exploit it. IAV basically is kind of like a zero to exploit, something that's not anticipated, okay? But somehow somebody gets in your network, all right? But now you have the mid game. Anybody here play chess? Okay, I play a little bit of chess. I love the term mid game because you have your opening, you move your pawn out, either the king pawn or queen's pawn. You have to figure out how you're going to develop your bishops and your knights, and maybe you move your rook out. That's the opening of the game. We're talking about the mid game here. The mid game is where you can detect the intruder's activity in your network using network monitoring. Okay? Understanding that our networks are not impenetrable, and understanding that by the time you get to the end of the attack, it's too expensive. What you want to do is use network monitoring to identify the intruders before they can take action on their objective. And there's many, many, many steps. So there's a term, remember I talked about those two frameworks. One is the Lockheed Martin kill chain. Lockheed Martin kill chain means there's a couple of steps, phase here, there's one phase here, but there's 5 phases here where you kill the attack. How you identify the attack is, and I'm going to use a term called MITRE ATT&CK framework. The MITRE ATT&CK framework helps you identify what are called tools, techniques, and procedures that the attacker is using. And a well-designed network detection and response tool can identify those attacks at every single step of the attack based on what we call IOCs, indicators of compromise. So here's where people spend their money. Firewalls at your perimeter, phishing training, that's $46.8 billion. And that's looking at maybe of those 13 families in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, that's maybe 3 of them over here. So we're spending $4.6 billion trying to stop those first 3, those initial intrusion vectors. And here at the end, they're spending money on insurance, and they're spending money on, Mandiant, CrowdStrike, who do great breach mitigation. They'll come in and clean it all up for you. It'll cost you about $1,000 an hour. Or you can pay $570,000 for an average payment. The fact is you want to stop it in that mid game. That's where you can observe it, and that's where you can take action to stop the attack. So what does ransomware recovery look like? Well, you can do one of two things. You want to avoid this. Anybody know what that picture is on the right? That's Colonial Pipeline. Literally, that is Colonial Pipeline. So you understand you have an event because you have the initial intrusion. They penetrated your network, but instead of having to pay, what we don't want to do is we don't want to accept that just because they get in, that all hope is lost. You know, what you want to do is you want to find them as early as possible in the intrusion process so that you can, we call it reduce the blast radius. You're still going to have to clean up some endpoints. You may have to fix Active Directory. You may have to reassign some new authentication mechanisms. Maybe even reassign some new identities, okay? But guess what? You can reduce the blast area and reduce the impact by using effective monitoring or by your customers using effective monitoring in their environment. So here's how we reduce the blast radius. So you have the initial intrusion, a virtual deck. This is an example. You have a VDI, dark side ransomware. This is how they do it. Dark side ransom is a organization. We put them out of business where they basically renamed themselves, but they're a Russian group. And what they did is they would compromise what are called VDIs. There's a virtual desktop infrastructure. Do you guys use virtual desktops? Yes. Okay, so you guys have VDI here. So, you know the VDI has been compromised, but guess what? You identify unusual traffic from an external endpoint. So when you guys take your nice laptops home and you get into your corporate network using your virtual desktop interface, your VDI, then what you can see, or not you, but a good network detection response tool will observe the traffic. And this is recon. See how they say recon there? That's where the bad guy is engaged in reconnaissance in your network, inside your network. Well, lateral, now we see the bad guy moving laterally. So now your network detection response tool has had two opportunities to see the bad guy, okay? The bad guy has to get lucky every single time. Once they're in your network, we just have to get lucky once, all right? So we can see either the unusual traffic, we can see the lateral movement as they're moving toward the assets they want to steal or compromise or corrupt through encryption. We start to see their exfil data. So now they're trying to exfil data that provides a value to them. And maybe they're exfilling data so they can encrypt it. Maybe they're exfilling data, like if you're a hospital system, so that they can hold it ransom. Finally, you have the data exfiltration, but boom, guess what? You can stop the attack because you see all of these 4 actions using your network detection and response tool. Now, here's how it works for your customers, your either defense customers, your large hospitals that have a large building management system infrastructure. What you can do is you have an NDR tool that monitors that entire segment. So maybe even if they get into an endpoint, some doctor takes a laptop home and he doesn't like to use 2-factor authentication because he's too cool, and he's got a great password called Sexy Doc, okay? So, yeah, you think I'm kidding? No, I saw that at Washington Regional. No. So you have all of these things. Maybe that endpoint gets compromised, but guess what? The hospital is secure and the building management systems are secure because you're monitoring them in the mid-game. So here are the key takeaways. Now, before I start with key takeaways, any questions? All right,
Mark?
Yes, sir.
So when we talk Internet of Things, that just compounds the whole issue, right? Because now more things are connected
Right.
that previously were not.
I want you to think of Internet of Things in 3 ways, okay? There's home systems, which are basically lightweight industrial control systems managing something at home. Like I have cameras, and my thermostats are connected to the internet, okay? I have a flat network, but I'm not that worried about it because someone gets in and messes with my heating, my air conditioning. I'm okay. You know, what are they gonna get? I've got this little server with all of our iPhone pictures because I have kids and they use up all my iPhone data. So, you know, they're gonna get all our, you know, TikTok pictures or whatnot. So the potential loss isn't that bad. So I don't spend a lot on that, so I'm okay with a single flat network. But those are home systems. So get back to answering the questions. IoT, the second is what happens in the enterprise IT environment. So this would be an internet thing right here. That computer over there and that entire stack over there, that AV stack, that's Internet of Things. Okay, so those are devices that can support business operations in a otherwise enterprise IT environment. When I was with before United Capital was acquired by Goldman Sachs, I was literally at a branch office of United Capital crawling around trying to find a device. We couldn't figure it out. We scanned it. We knew it had vulnerabilities. We used Qualys for our vulnerability scanner. And eventually we found out it was the marquee outside the building that was running a stock ticker on it. That's IoT, Internet of Things. You would not expect that to be built on a Microsoft Windows 2012 server version, you know? So those are lightweight enterprise IT systems that perform functions other than servers and printers, okay? So that's the second class of IoT. Third class of IoT are what you see in the quasi-industrial environment, where there's a lot of functionality built into that. One could argue that building management systems and the HVAC systems are Internet of Things. I don't think people are making that argument about switchgear controls, you know, for a large electrical power distribution grid. But certainly, I think when you think of IoT, there's the home user stuff, there's the enterprise IT attached stuff, and then there's the quasi operational technology equipment. Did I answer your question? Absolutely.